Chapter 1051. Pei Chichi bit her lips and said in a low voice, "How did you know?" Then she stared at him and said, "Tang Yu, you are despicable. You investigated me. Mrs. Tang, I have the right to know what my wife has been doing behind my back." He pinched her chin and said unhappily, "Macho men? With Xiong Mao?" Pei Chichi cursed little went to death in her heart. How could she find a macho man? Even if she wanted to find one, she had to do it secretly. Her vigor was extinguished in an instant. She looked up at Tang Yu pitifully. "I'm not the one who asked for it. It seems that you are innocent," Mr. Tang said generously, "then forget it. Don't do it again." Pei Chichi breathed a sigh of relief. Then she felt that something was wrong. He was the one who did it. Why did she have to thank him in the end? When she glared at him again, Tang Yu put on the posture of a superior and leaned against the headboard. He flipped through a magazine and seemed to be deep in thought. "Chichi, if I can't satisfy all of your fantasies, it'll be my fault. I'll be more careful in the future." He was calm, but Pei Chichi felt her hair stand on end. She stared at him. Tang Yu smiled again. "Let's start tonight. I haven't eaten yet." Pei Chichi's voice was as sweet as honey. Tang Yu looked at her and smiled. He put down the magazine and put his fingers on his belt. His action was particularly seductive and suggestive. Pei Chichi licked her lips and felt ashamed of the crazy thoughts in her mind. Then, his tie was thrown in front of her. She looked up at him. Tang Yu held her in his arms and whispered in her ear, "Mrs. Tang, you can do whatever you want with me tonight." Pei Chichi looked at the tie in her hand and swallowed hard. "Can I ask for a whip and a candle?" Tang Yu's face darkened. Pei Chichi was especially perceptive and immediately indicated that a tie was enough. "That's enough, Little Yu, I will treat you well tonight." Reality proved that she could never win against this unscrupulous businessman. She did not understand why the collar ended up in her hands in the end. Pei Chichi wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Her voice was hoarse, but he did not let her go. "Tang Yu, we're getting married," she reminded him. Tang Yu's sweat dripped on her body. It was so hot and scalding that she almost jumped up. His handsome face was slightly contorted due to his arousal, but he did not stop. He pinched her chin, forced her to open her mouth, and kissed her deeply. Pei Chichi felt like she was being tortured to death by him. She squirmed and struggled, but to no avail. The two of them were entangled like fish out of water. Just as Pei Chichi was gasping for breath to calm down, Tang Yu kissed her lips lightly, and his eyes were deep. "Pei Chichi, you still know that you're going to get married, huh?" She finally realized that he was angry. But at this moment, Tang Yu's anger had mostly dissipated. Pei Chichi was a little embarrassed. She lay flat and did not dare to make a sound again. Although she was sometimes mischievous, Tang Yu still had a lot of authority in her heart. She bit her lip and looked at him secretly. After a while, she said softly, "Are you still angry?" "Why should I be angry?" Tang Yu snorted and turned his back to sleep. Pei Chichi was still hungry, and he had no intention of letting her eat. However, he seemed to be really angry. She hugged him from behind and pursed her lips. "Tang Yu." Chapter 1052. She rubbed her head against his back again. "It's not my intention. I won't do that either." It was rare for her to coax him, and she also felt that his awkward look was quite cute. Tang Yu snorted and ignored her. "Tang Yu." She dragged the last syllable, trying to please him. "What do you want?" The girl begged him from behind with her soft hands around his waist and her face on his back. Even if his heart was made of stone, it would probably have melted by now. Tang Yu asked softly, "I can do whatever I want." She nodded vigorously. Tang Yu smiled. "Even a whip or a candle?" Pei Chichi's little face was bitter. Tang Yu turned around and held her in his arms. He stroked her gently as if he was petting a pet. "All right, I'll go cook for you." Pei Chichi looked up and asked carefully, "Not angry anymore?" "Never." He pinched her little face. "I'm just teasing you. Little fool." Pei Chichi wanted to glare at him, but she couldn't bear to. In such a quiet night, only the two of them were awake, and they hugged each other so softly. She wore white pajamas and was carried downstairs by Tang Yu like a little princess. She sat on the counter and hummed a song while Tang Yu made paella for her. From time to time, he would frown. "Chichi, it's so unpleasant to hear." Pei Chichi pouted. "Many people say that my voice is very pleasant to hear." Tang Yu put the paella on the small dining table, turned around and walked in front of her. He put his hands on her waist, but he wasn't in a hurry to carry her down. Instead, he whispered in her ear, "Chichi, didn't anyone tell you that you're tone deaf?" "No way." She stubbornly kicked him with her little feet, but he held her in his hand and played with her shamelessly. In the end, he smiled as if he was thinking about something. His voice was even hoarser. "When you scream, it sounds pretty good." Shameless. This time, it exploded. Pei Chichi hammered his shoulder fiercely. He picked her up, and she acted like a little crazy. The young man and woman were entangled in the middle of the night, and the meal was also messy. In the end, she was carried by him on the counter and had a round. As soon as Pei Chichi thought about how she would have to serve her meals from here, she felt too ashamed to face anyone. Moreover, no one had ever been carried into the car in their pajamas on their wedding day. When Pei Chichi woke up, it was already 9 o'clock. She was woken up by Tang Yu's kiss. He was already dressed in a black suit, looking handsome and full of asceticism. Pei Chichi hugged his neck. "Morning, Mr. Tang." "Morning, Mrs. Tang." He kissed her lips. "Let's have breakfast first. The ceremony will begin soon." She looked down at her pajamas and looked at him sadly. Tang Yu smiled. "There's still time." Half an hour later, Pei Chichi sat in front of the mirror and looked at herself in it. She was wearing a white, off-the-shoulder wedding dress made of the most expensive lace. It was custom-made in Italy, and this wedding dress alone cost millions. The stylist helped her style and put down the veil. She stood like a princess. Xiao Wen helped her to the main hall of the cruise. Pei Chichi was a little surprised. It was so big that she couldn't imagine it. If she didn't know beforehand, she would have thought that she was in a hotel lobby. Chapter 1053. The luxurious cabin was beautifully decorated, and the chandeliers were all made of Italian crystals. On the ground, there was a long red carpet. On both sides of the dining table, there were 2 rows of silverware and candlesticks. Each of them was engraved with the words "Yu's wife." There was a pink rose in front of each guest seat, and only the main seat had 999 red roses. Shen Zhongshan was already standing at the door, taking his youngest daughter. "Dad." Pei Chichi's eyes were a little wet. She knew that Tang Yu wanted her to have a chance to walk the red carpet with her real father. At this moment, her hand was held by Shen Zhongshan. She was happy. Shen Zhongshan had probably restrained himself for a long time. Although his figure was not as good as before, it was much better than before. He had lost about 20 pounds, and wearing formal clothes, one could see some of his former elegance. He held Pei Chichi's hand and walked forward slowly. It was as if he was walking back the path of his youth, as if he had returned to the time when he was with Zhao Ku. His negligence had harmed a woman who loved him, causing her life to be a tragedy. He had also harmed his wife and daughter. Shen Lian could not tell who she was now. One moment, she was Shen Lian, and the next moment, she was Tang Xin. Now, he handed Chichi over to Tang Yu. He would use the rest of his life to atone for his sins. Shen Zhongshan walked slowly through the long corridor, past Mrs. Shen, Pei Huan, Laro Khan, and the Lin family, including Lin Jinrong. No one could stop them from falling in love and being together. Finally, he handed Pei Chichi over to Tang Yu. Pei Chichi's hand was placed in Tang Yu's. She raised her head and looked at him through a veil. They saw each other every day, but at this moment, she still felt that he was as handsome as a god, which made her heart tremble. There was no priest, only a simple ceremony of exchanging rings and signing a certificate. Although it was simple, it was solemn. After doing all this, he kissed her deeply. At the same time, the fireworks went off, and there was a burst of cheers. In the midst of the laughter, there was suddenly a burst of crying, calling for Papa and Mama. It was a little heart. Pei Chichi and Tang Yu's bodies froze. Following the sound, they slowly turned their heads, he saw an unexpected person, Shun Lian. Shun Lian was dressed in a white wedding dress. She stood at the door with a child in her hand. It was Xiao Xinxin. A knife was pressed tightly against Xiao Xinxin's neck, and there was a trace of blood on the edge of the knife. The blood in Pei Chichi's body seemed to be frozen. Shun Lian smiled gently. Pei Chichi, my dearest sister, congratulations. Her gaze then shifted to Tang Yu. And you, the man I love the most. Shun Lian seemed to be in a trance, and she seemed to be talking to herself. Today is your wedding day. No, it's my wedding day with Tang Yu. Yes, it's my wedding day with Tang Yu. Shun Lian's voice was a little shrill. Pei Chichi, you deserve to die. As Shun Lian spoke, she lowered her head and looked at the little heart in her hand. Look, this is the child I gave birth to for Tang Yu. It's so pretty and cute. Pei Chichi's eyes were filled with tears, and her lips were trembling. She held Tang Yu's arm so tightly that she almost pinched his flesh. Shun Lian was pretending. She lied to all of them. However, she did not dare to make a sound, for fear of agitating Shun Lian. Nothing could happen to her little heart. Chapter 1054. At this moment, Mrs. Shun covered her mouth and cried, Shun Lian, haven't you done enough evil? Stop it and let go of the child. Shun Lian mumbled. When she saw her mother, she sneered. At this moment, her mother was still speaking up for that slut. Mom, do you know why I'm fine? Shun Lian sneered. I did take the medicine that day, but I vomited once in the washroom. So, no one suspected me when I pretended to be crazy. She laughed happily. Just now, when everyone was giving their blessings to Pei Chichi and Tang Yu, she got their little baby. This child was actually their child. Tang Yu had been fooling her all along. They deserved to die. Shun Lian was suddenly in a trance and could not control herself. Mrs. Shun's face was full of tears as she looked at her daughter in pain. What a sin. Why did her daughter become like this? She became a demon. Shun Lian's voice was very soft. Mom, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand? Why would I hurt my child? She lowered her head and pushed the knife in her hand forward. Suddenly, a stream of blood came out and dyed Xiaoxin's white dress red. Xiaoxin's eyes were full of tears. She looked at her papa and did not dare to cry. Papa was telling her not to cry. Xiaoxin should not cry, Xiaoxin should be brave. Is this how you hurt me? Shun Lian laughed crazily. Tang Yu, Pei Chichi, do you feel sorry? Let me tell you a secret. My feet hurt like this too when I'm not injured. She shook her head gently and the knife in her hand was moving gently on Xiaoxin's neck. Xiaoxin's tears were rolling in her eyes, but she did not dare to fall. That look broke Pei Chichi's heart. Shun Lian, what do you want? She tried to steady her voice. Shun Lian stared at her little face and laughed softly. Look, Pei Chichi, you're still so high and mighty. Do you think it's the past? She raised her hand and a strand of Xiaoxin's hair fell and flew into the sea. Xiaoxin was so scared that she cried. Listen, that's the sound of a child crying. Doesn't it sound similar to Tang Xin's? Shun Lian's face was contorted. Coupled with her wedding gown, she looked even more devilish. Pei Chichi's body trembled. If it weren't for Tang Yu's presence, she would have fallen to the ground. Shun Chongshan said in a deep voice, Shun Lian, enough. You shut up. Shun Lian took a few steps back and said sternly. Her feet were on the deck, and the sea was behind her. At this time, Tang Yu and Pei Chichi followed and found a speedboat next to the cruise ship with a person tied to it. Unexpectedly, it was Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan sat on the speedboat and his face was abnormally red. Did you see him? Shun Lian raised her eyebrows and smiled strangely. She held Xiaoxin in one hand and threw a bottle to Pei Chichi's feet with the other. Eat the medicine inside. There are 5 pills in total. I want to see you eat them together. The bottle rolled to Pei Chichi's feet. She looked down and was dazed for a moment. Then, she looked up and looked at Shun Lian. Don't bargain. Eat it now, or else your baby daughter's neck will probably be cut into 2. Shun Lian's long hair was blown by the wind, blowing wildly with the sea breeze. She started to count down. 10, 9, 8, 7. Chapter 1055. Shun Lian laughed wildly. Tang Yu, do you think that I will still believe you? He would give himself to her. Did he still have himself? His entire person, his entire heart belonged to Pei Chichi. What did she want him to do? Don't come over. Shun Lian's face was a little twisted. Don't come over, otherwise, I will definitely do something tragic. The knife in her hand was pressed against Xiaoxin's neck. If she went down, Xiaoxin would not be there anymore. Pei Chichi gently pushed Tang Yu away and her lips were tightly pursed. I'll take it. She unscrewed the bottle and there were 4 white pills and 1 red pill inside. Pei Chichi, do you know what that is? Shun Lian chuckled softly. That is an aphrodisiac. Pei Chichi's face was expressionless as she held the pill in her mouth. Tang Yu's voice was hurried and frightening. Chichi, Tang Yu, you must save Xiaoxin, okay? She is only 3 years old. Pei Chichi said this with tears in her eyes. She knew that her decision was cruel to Tang Yu, but she had no other choice. Even if she went to hell, she had to live carefully. Very good. A very great mother's love. Shun Lian's face had a hint of fierceness. Tang Yu, you can't bear to let her go, right? In a while, we will watch the woman you love the most go down. When the effects of the drug take effect, we will admire the way she looks when she climbs onto Qin Anlan's body and begs him to take her. She raised her chin and laughed maniacally. I forgot to tell you, Qin Anlan has also taken the drug. At this time, he can even handle 10 women. Tang Yu looked at her as if he wanted to grind her to ashes. Now, the more he hated her, the happier she was. Tang Yu, when you see her like a bitch, you won't think of her as a pure and clean woman. At that time, you will despise her. Shun Lian smiled happily. Finally, she had been waiting for this day. Pei Chichi walked to the steps and looked at Shun Lian. Let the child go. Go down, I'll let go of the child and focus on the performance. Shun Lian's eyes were cold, but she quickly smiled. Pei Chichi, I know you must be regretting not killing me back then, right? Between us, it's either you die or I die. She gritted her teeth. I'll give you 10 more seconds. If you don't go down, I'll let your precious daughter meet that idiot Tang Xin in heaven. Pei Chichi turned around and looked deeply at Tang Yu. There was too much pain in that look. Tang Yu instinctively grabbed her hand. Chichi, Pei Chichi, I love you. She mouthed to him. Her voice was hoarse and almost indiscernible, but he understood. He understood. He regretted not getting rid of Shun Lian 1,000 times more than she did. His and Chichi's kindness led to today's ending. His heart slowly hardened. But, for Xiaoxin's safety, he could only endure. He looked at Pei Chichi and could only watch as she broke away from his hand inch by inch. The railings on the deck opened to the small boat. When Pei Chichi walked down, she suddenly pulled down her veil and raised her hand. Everyone was shocked by the determination on her face. Even Xiaoxin called her mother in a daze. Maybe she realized that she would never see her mother again. Xiaoxin forgot to cry and forget everything. Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu. A drop of tear fell into the sea. It was the last tenderness she left for him. Tang Yu jumped down, took off his coat and quickly drove in the direction where Pei Chichi had disappeared. On the other side, Pei Chichi had been driving for 10 minutes. Her vision started to blur and her body started to heat up abnormally. She knew that she could not drive anymore. If she did, she would die, and so would Qin Anlan. The small boat slowly stopped in the middle of the sea and swayed with the waves. She went over and kicked Qin Anlan. Her voice was a little weak. Are you okay? Chapter 1057. Pei Chichi pursed her lips, took a basin, and filled it with seawater. Then, she walked over and poured the water over his head. Qin Anlan, are you awake? She looked at him, and her breathing was a little rapid. Qin Anlan shook his head, and he became more clear-headed. He did not remember how he fell for Shun Lian's trick. He only remembered that he was like this after drinking a glass of wine. At this moment, his body was very tense, as if it was about to explode. It was very uncomfortable. He wanted a woman, and he desperately wanted a woman. He looked at Pei Chichi, and his gaze was a little deep. His voice was hoarse. "You're awake." He wanted her. At this moment, Qin Anlan was like an animal with the hunting characteristics of a male. Pei Chichi used the last bit of her willpower to let go of him. Qin Anlan shook his hand. Pei Chichi sat at the side. She was wearing a pure white wedding dress. She wore it for Tang Yu. Her cheeks were abnormally red, and so was her body. She curled up her body and looked at Qin Anlan. "I don't care. Don't touch me." She lay on the side of the boat, trying to wake herself up. She wanted to splash seawater on her face to calm the heat in her body. She was very uncomfortable, but she only wanted Tang Yu. She was worried about her heart, so the effect of the drug on her body was reduced. Otherwise, she would not have been able to drive the boat here. However, she was hugged by Qin Anlan from behind. Pei Chichi's body froze. "Pei Chichi, I have always liked you." He buried his face in her neck, and suddenly turned her body around. His big hands tore her wedding dress into pieces. Pei Chichi screamed. She wanted to escape, but she had nowhere to escape in this vast sea. She was hugged by Qin Anlan from behind. The world was so straightforward, and the world was so simple. "I can't take it anymore." He hugged her, ignoring her struggles. His fingers caressed her red lips. "Pei Chichi, be good." His expression was almost painful as he gasped in pain. If the person in front of him was not Pei Chichi, perhaps he would not be so moved. But she was. He knew that he was hugging someone else's wife. She was drugged, but she still refused to let him hug her. Pei Chichi screamed and kicked wildly. The crystal shoe on her foot flew off and fell into the sea, floating on the surface. She screamed, "Qin Anlan, are you crazy?" She held on to the last glimmer of hope. She hoped that Qin Anlan would wake up and take her back. But now, she was embarrassed and angry. She felt his hand unzipping his pants. Her long hair fell over her shoulders and her eyes were filled with tears. She didn't want to do this. Perhaps, after taking that medicine, she would become a fool and forget everything. In that case, she might as well die cleanly. She did not know where she got the strength from, but she struggled to break free from him. She ran to the other side of the boat. "Qin Anlan, I'd rather die." Her gaze looked into the distance. It was in the direction of Tang Yu. He knew that she loved him. Pei Chichi did not give Qin Anlan any time to react. She jumped straight into the water. She knew that Qin Anlan had feelings for her for a long time. Now that they had been drugged, she was afraid that she would not be able to take it. When that pure white figure jumped into the water, Qin Anlan's Adam's apple bobbed. He sobered up and jumped after her without hesitation. "Pei Chichi, nothing must happen to you." Chapter 1058. He searched for her figure in the seawater, looking everywhere. A minute later, he saw that pure white figure slowly descending. He grabbed her arm and dragged her over. However, her feet were entangled by the seaweed. He could only go over and pull the seaweed away. He tried for a long time but to no avail. Pei Chichi closed her eyes and shook her head. "Qin Anlan, leave. If you don't leave, you'll die with me." Qin Anlan hugged her with one hand and used the other to pull her away. They used the buoyancy to float upwards. Pei Chichi's face was pale after being underwater for so long. Her hands drooped down. She might not be able to live. She only hoped that Tang Yu could save Xiaoshan. She didn't regret her choice. She loved her child. Xiaoshan was so cute. Qin Anlan covered her lips and passed the air in his mouth to her. She could vaguely feel it and struggled to open her eyes. "Qin Anlan, you bastard. You idiot. You should hate me." She tried to push him away, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move him. He hugged her tightly and said in a muffled voice, "If you want to see him, you have to live." Live well. Who was talking in her ear? Pei Chichi tried to open her eyes, but she couldn't. She could only hear voices in English. "Why hasn't my wife woken up yet?" "Mr. Qin, Mrs. Qin's physiological signs are stable. She should wake up soon," a man with a thick English accent answered. Pei Chichi tried to open her eyes. Through a small gap, she saw a black-haired Asian man and a blonde man. She instinctively felt closer to the black-haired man. Excuse me, where is Mr. Cheen? They said she was Mrs. Cheen, but where was Mr. Cheen? Her gaze fell on Cheen Anlan's face. She instinctively felt that he was Mr. Cheen. Cheen Anlan's hand that was holding it trembled. Pei Chichi forgot everything. I'm Anlan. You, sir. Cheen Anlan closed his eyes and told a perfect lie. Chichi, on the day of our wedding, you fell into the sea. Do you remember? Pei Chichi's eyes were a little blank. She still couldn't remember. It's okay. Our Chichi will think about it slowly. She will remember it eventually. Cheen Anlan hugged her and planted a kiss on her forehead. You've been asleep for a month. Do you feel any discomfort? Pei Chichi shook her head. I'm just hungry. Cheen Anlan smiled faintly. I'll make your favorite paella for you. You used to eat it a lot. However, I can only eat some plain porridge today. He first gave her a little hope, then dealt her a blow. Pei Chichi was confused. Paella? She actually couldn't remember the taste. Later, a week later, she was discharged from the hospital and returned to Cheen Anlan's apartment in Manhattan. It was an extremely luxurious apartment. The entire floor was designed with floor-to-ceiling windows that were transparent on all sides. At night, one could see the entire New York's night view from any angle. Pei Chichi looked around. She ran around the apartment barefooted, trying to find a familiar place. Why would anyone be willing to do something like exchanging saliva? The contact between their lips was already her limit. Finally, she reached out and touched her stomach. Anlan, I'm hungry. Cheen Anlan was in a daze. Then, he sighed and stroked her hair. Okay, let's go eat. Pei Chichi nodded and went out with him obediently. She sat at the dining table and Cheen Anlan brought 2 plates of paella over. You've been asking to eat this. I remember that you like to eat it more. After she said that, she was also stunned. Cheen Anlan suppressed his irritation and smiled. I still have something to do. I'll come back later. He ran away in panic. He brought her to live in the United States. She had forgotten everything in the past, but Tang Yu still filled their lives. At 10 o'clock in New York, Cheen Anlan took a shower in the bathroom attached to the study. He walked to the French windows in the living room and stood there, looking down at the night view of the entire city. Chapter 1061. That little one. When she smiled at him and spoke to him in such a soft tone, he felt that he could give her the whole world. He held a glass of red wine and drank it slowly. At this moment, she was in his bedroom, on his bed. Tonight, he could have her legitimately. Perhaps she would cry, but that was just a small tantrum, and not because she belonged to someone else. She belonged to Cheen Anlan now. Slowly, he finished the wine in the glass in one gulp, put it down and turned to the bedroom. There was a small night light in the bedroom, and there was a special charm to it. Pei Chichi was still awake, reading a thick book. Cheen Anlan was wearing a black nightgown, and he leaned against her. He took the book from her hand and placed it at the head of the bed. Chichi, it's time to sleep. He sounded like an old married couple. Pei Chichi nodded and looked at him. Then, she pulled the blanket and lay down. She closed her eyes and turned her back. Cheen Anlan also turned his body, and his voice was a little hoarse. Chichi, what if I intend to do something? She turned her head and looked at him under the dim light. Anlan, I'm so tired. Next time, okay? She was begging him, and she was even willing to hug his arm and shake it gently. Cheen Anlan lowered his head and looked at the little person in his arms. He chuckled. Chichi, you just need to lie down. She bit her lip. Anlan, but, no buts. He had already kissed her little mouth, and he murmured beside her lips. I want. He sucked on her little mouth, cherishing it very much. But her little teeth were clenched tightly, and he couldn't do anything even if he wanted to. Cheen Anlan turned and kissed along her lips, all the way to her ear, leaving a trail of hot kisses. He leaned against her little ear and said in a low voice, Chichi, open up. She shivered. Cheen Anlan leaned over and stared at her beautiful face. He lowered his head and kissed her again, but she still gritted her teeth and resisted. How can this be good? He sucked on her little mouth and pinched her little chin with one hand, slightly exerting force. She was forced to open her mouth, and he took advantage of the situation. Pei Chichi instinctively resisted and struggled, but his heat was wrapped around her, and she could not escape no matter how hard she tried. That kind of unfamiliar love Jade scared her. She opened her eyes wide and stared at him anxiously. She felt that the mechanical stirring was really boring. There was even saliva. Didn't he find it dirty? Qin Anlan was a little immersed, but he also noticed that the little person under him was not engrossed. He retreated and kissed her lips, coaxing her, "Chichi, scream for me. Do I need to call for a kiss?" She stammered, "I want to brush my teeth," and looked at him with wide eyes. Qin Anlan looked at her silently for a long time, and he was a little hesitant. Finally, he let her go and sighed. "Forget it, next time." When he said that, she ran to the bathroom in a puff of smoke. Qin Anlan lay down and took out a cigarette from the bedside table. He was a little vexed. He should not have let her go just now. He should have hardened his heart and taken her. But he still couldn't bear to force her. He was not a fool, and it was not that he did not feel her resistance. She had no feelings for him, not even a physiological reaction. When he kissed her, her tongue was stiff, not to mention when he touched her, her whole body was as stiff as a rock. Chapter 1062. Her instinctive resistance was because she didn't love him. Perhaps even she didn't know it herself. She might have thought that they were in love. Qin Anlan, this was a stupid decision, but he didn't regret it, because the temptation was too great. Pei Chichi came out of the bathroom and saw him smoking. She ran over to help him extinguish the cigarette and pouted. "Qin Anlan, try smoking again next time." He smiled and stroked her hair. "Next time when I kiss you, you're not allowed to brush your teeth." Her face was a little red. "As long as you don't stick your tongue into my mouth." He smiled and ruffled her hair again, saying nothing. She lay down and was pulled into his arms. "It's hot." Pei Chichi went out again and smiled naughtily. "Anlan, I think you should go and calm down." Qin Anlan glared at her. He really should put on his black robe and go out. He took 2 steps out and came back to take a pack of cigarettes. "I'm going to smoke a few." With that said, he walked out. Pei Chichi rolled around on the bed. She felt that he wouldn't be coming back to sleep tonight. She rolled back and forth, feeling extremely happy, even though she was a little inappropriate. She was most afraid that Qin Anlan would have sexual desires. She forgot everything. Qin Anlan was her husband, so she felt that she didn't have any skills to make a living. She still had to cling tightly to Qin Anlan. Even if she didn't feel that she loved him, she wasn't even interested in the affairs of a married couple, even though he was so handsome that even the heavens would hate him. If he really wanted it, she would kiss him. Kissing him on the lips was fine, but deep kissing was out of the question. She tried it just now and it didn't feel good. Pei Chichi felt that she was a cold-hearted artist. She didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Artists were all eccentric. Besides, Qin Anlan must love her to death. After losing her memory, Pei Chichi was a little heartless. She liked the sense of security that Qin Anlan gave her, and the unlimited secondary card. Feelings. She liked him too. She liked his looks and his money. As for love, she had never thought about it. Qin Anlan's heart is pierced, she fell asleep with pleasure. As for Qin Anlan, he stood there for half the night and finally went to sleep in the study. Similarly, Tang Yu couldn't fall asleep like Qin Anlan. He sat in the study, holding a pair of silver high-heeled shoes that he had found on the surface of the sea that day. When he and Laro Khan rushed over, Pei Chichi and Qin Anlan had both disappeared into the sea. He frantically jumped into the sea to look for it, and it was old Khan who dragged him back. The search team of 1,000 people searched the sea for a whole month, but to no avail. Everyone thought that Pei Chichi was gone, but Tang Yu firmly believed that she was still alive. Because there was no news of Qin Anlan's death. If he wasn't dead, then it was very likely that Chichi was still alive. But Qin Anlan had disappeared, and no one knew where he was. Tang Yu had almost searched the whole world, but he couldn't find him. Sometimes, he would catch traces of him, but by the time he arrived, Qin Anlan had disappeared again. Just like that, they chased each other. 2 years passed just like that. Tang Yu didn't chase after them anymore, but changed his strategy. He began to suppress King Entertainment on all fronts. Although one was in business and the other was in business, the two parties didn't have much connection. But Northern Boy Yi and Jin Taihe were both in Tang Yu's hands, and those companies had to show some respect to Tang Yu. So the resources and investments that King Entertainment received were greatly reduced. He believed that Qin Anlan would appear and return to City B. He had a hunch that Chichi was by Qin Anlan's side, and that she would return with Qin Anlan. His heart was trembling slightly because of this speculation. It wasn't that he didn't think about it further, but every time he thought about it, he had to restrain himself from thinking about that possibility. Just as Tang Yu thought, in Manhattan, New York, Qin Anlan was packing his luggage. Chapter 1063. Just as Tang Yu thought, Qin Anlan was packing his luggage in Manhattan, New York. After he was done, he zipped up his luggage. Pei Chichi looked at him and pouted. "Anlan, are you really not going to bring me back?" He said that they were both from B City, but this time, he wanted her to stay obediently and he could go back alone. Qin Anlan looked at the little person sitting on the luggage and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But his heart was soft. If he had a choice, he didn't want to take the risk. He reached out and touched her head. "I don't have any relatives in B City. I'll be very busy when I go back. Be good. Wait here for me to come back." He paused and coughed lightly. "Don't forget to see the doctor. I hope that when I come back, you will." He smiled, and it was very obvious. At the mention of this, she didn't cling to him anymore. These 2 years, she had been seeing the doctor because she was cold. In the beginning, she and Qin Anlan slept in the same bed. But she thought that no man would be happy lying in the same bed with a cold wife, right? And sometimes, when he wanted to do something, it was inconvenient. Later, naturally, he rarely returned to the bedroom. Later, he simply moved to the guest room. He took her to see the doctor, and after a checkup, the doctor said that there was nothing wrong with her. However, Pei Chichi told Qin Anlan that there was something wrong with her and she needed treatment. This treatment lasted for 2 years. In these 2 years, she lived quite happily. Of course, Qin Anlan wasn't too happy. She mentioned a divorce, saying that she couldn't fulfill her duties as a wife. Qin Anlan didn't agree. He only asked her to go to Dr. York on time for treatment. Every time Pei Chichi went, she would sleep there. She felt that she had let Qin Anlan down. He was very good to her, so good that she felt that she would let him down even more if she didn't divorce him. She mentioned it twice, and the third time, he got angry. After that, he went on a business trip for a week and didn't call her at all. She thought he had agreed, but when he came back, it was as if nothing had happened. He even brought her a business trip gift. He kissed her forehead. "I'm going to take a shower." Feeling her body tense, he smiled bitterly. "I'll sleep in the study tonight." As long as he didn't make such a request, Pei Chichi wouldn't be wary of him, and they could get along well. For a husband and wife to be like this, it really made one sigh. Looking at her beautiful face, Qin Anlan was a little absent-minded. He squatted down and looked her in the eye. "Why do you want to go back so much?" "Anlan, you used the word return." "Of course I want to." She gnawed on his words. "This place is full of blonde hair and red eyes. I don't really like it." It was because the person in her heart wasn't here, so she didn't like it. Qin Anlan suddenly made up his mind. "Well then, come back to B City with me." He felt like he was taking a huge gamble. Perhaps this time, she wouldn't be able to return. However, he also knew that if he trapped her in New York and made her poor for the rest of her life, she wouldn't be his. Qin Anlan pursed his lips and smiled. "The car is downstairs. Hurry up and prepare. I'll give you 10 minutes. Pei Chichi immediately jumped up and ran back to the master bedroom. She immediately took out a box. She was wearing denim shorts and a white t-shirt. Her long black hair was tied in a ponytail, making her look young and energetic. Chapter 1064. He felt helpless. He took her suitcase and walked towards the entrance of the condominium. Pei Chichi followed behind him, making a face at him and skipping behind him. In the elevator, Qin Anlan looked at the girl who looked like a young girl behind him. Even though he had so many troubles in his heart, he still smiled lightly when he looked at her. The corners of his mouth curled up in joy. Pei Chichi stood beside him and looked up. Anlan, how long are you going to stay in B City? About a year, he answered her. Chichi, if you see Tang Yu in this year and don't fall in love with him again, then I will take you away, forever. A sense of sadness rose in his heart again. After spending 2 years with her day and night, she didn't fall in love with him. He knew that she liked him, just like a younger sister liked her older brother. She liked his care, liked talking to him. She liked him even when he didn't have any sexual demands on her. But what he wanted was not just like, but love and sex. Qin Anlan wasn't a saint. In a marriage, only love and no sex wouldn't work. Only sex and no love, the quality of the marriage wouldn't work either. Oh, then Anlan, can I look for a job? She looked up and asked naturally. His body visibly stiffened. Look for a job and leave him? But Qin Anlan smiled faintly. Of course. After saying that, he regretted it. But seeing how happy she was, he didn't change his words. At the same time, at the Boyi group in B City, Tang Yu stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the dark night outside. The lights outside were bright, but his heart had been lonely for 2 whole years. Xiao Ran and Meng Qingcheng came in. Meng Qingcheng had already returned to the team last year. He said that on account of Tang Yu's current situation, he would forgive him. The two of them came in and looked at each other. Xiao Ran said, President, Qin Anlan took a private plane back to B City from New York in the United States. He will arrive at 1 o'clock tonight. Tang Yu slowly turned around. His elegant face was a little thinner, but it didn't affect his handsomeness. He looked at Xiao Ran and asked in a hoarse voice, what about her? No one had ever confirmed that Pei Chichi was still alive. Everything was just his conjecture. However, at this moment, he was still uncertain. That uncertainty came from his fear and terror. Xiao Ran paused. Qin Anlan didn't board the plane alone. The other one was Pei Chichi. Tang Yu closed his eyes and turned to look at the dark night. His voice was hoarser than the dark night. Help me prepare the car. Xiao Ran stopped him. CEO, I suggest, we continue to observe. Prepare the car. His voice was cold and hard. Xiao Ran was stunned for a moment and immediately understood. He nodded and said, yes. He went out with Meng Qingcheng and closed the door. Meng Qingcheng lit a cigarette and said, let's go for a drink. They wouldn't be able to sleep tonight anyway. Who knew what terrible things Tang Yu would do? Think about it. His wife had been left at someone else's house for 2 years. No one would be able to stand it. Moreover, Tang Yu loved Pei Chichi to death. Xiao Ran smiled. Okay. Let's go to your office. Meng Qingcheng's office had many famous wines. She had wanted to try them for a long time, however, after drinking 2 glasses, both of them were a little drunk and sat on the sofa to rest. They didn't know who started it, but they hugged and kissed. Chapter 1065. Meng Qingcheng, are you sure you like me when you kiss me? I'm not Tang Xin. I'm not the little girl that you've waited for and guarded for so many years. Under the chandelier, Meng Qingcheng's expression slowly turned cold. He held his forehead and said softly, Xiao Ran, I'm sorry. I drank a little too much, he explained. Xiao Ran only sneered and slowly sat up straight. She tidied herself up. I thought so too. She stood up. Her slender body under the form-fitting suit made her look like a uniform. Xiao Ran was very good-looking, but her looks were overshadowed by her abilities. People would first pay attention to her profession, but they would ignore the fact that she was a good-looking older girl. Xiao Ran was already 28 years old. She had long passed the best age for marriage. When she walked out, she was stunned for a moment, then she shook her head. She thought that she could not wait for him anymore. She was not young anymore. She should find someone to marry. Instead of waiting for him to think it through, waiting for him to come out, however, everything was just wishful thinking. Xiao Ran raised her head. She did not cry. It was nothing. They had never started. She did not even tell him that she liked him. Meng Qingcheng suddenly came out. Xiao Ran turned around. The stars in her eyes betrayed her. Meng Qingcheng was a little stunned. His lips moved. He wanted to say something, but he knew that some things could not be taken back once they were said. He and Xiao Ran were friends. That kiss was initiated by him. It was not a light kiss. It was a passionate kiss. A girl was willing to accept such a kiss. Her intentions were obvious. Qingcheng, forget about it. Xiao Ran said casually, I'm going back to my hometown this weekend. What are you going back for? He heard himself asking. Xiao Ran smiled. A blind date. She stuck out her tongue and said playfully, I'm not young anymore. I'm 28 years old. She smiled, but her voice sounded a little choked. Meng Qingcheng, you waited for Tang Yu to grow up, but I waited for you until I'm old. I can't wait any longer. If you don't come over, then I can only leave. Meng Qingcheng's eyes were a little hot. He knew that if he opened his mouth now, Xiao Ran would stay and not go on the blind date. He understood her feelings and understood that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't have lived to this age. She wouldn't have had to go on blind dates and be picky. It wasn't that he wasn't impulsive, but in the end, he still put his hand in his pocket and quietly clenched it. That's good. Xiao Ran's lips trembled slightly. Meng Qingcheng, that's not good at all. I don't want to go on a blind date at all. I'm going, not to get married, but to forget you. After Xiao Ran left, Meng Qingcheng stood there for a long time. Perhaps, he had already felt Xiao Ran's feelings before, but he didn't dare to confirm it. He had a city in his heart, a person. It was unfair to accept anyone, but now he had still made her sad. He was a jerk. He was the one who provoked her and kissed her. He had always known what a noble and unsullied girl Xiao Ran was. The Boeing plane cut through the sky above B City's airport. When it landed, it was already 1 in the night. The moment Qin Anlan got off the plane, he was surrounded by the senior executives of King Entertainment. There were too many things for him to handle even if it was 1 in the night. I'm going to the restroom, Pei Chichi mouthed to him. Chapter 1066. Pei Chichi waved her hand and ran to the washroom with her bag. Actually, she wasn't in a hurry. She just wanted to get some fresh air, so she was absent-minded. When she opened the door of the washroom, she didn't realize that she had entered the men's washroom. There was only one man standing in the big washroom, with his back facing her. She was a photographer, so she instinctively captured beauty. Even at such a moment, she still felt that the man's back was very good, the kind that was suitable for a woman to lean on, or hug. Pei Chichi was stunned. She actually had a desire for a stranger's back at the airport. She wanted to retreat silently, but the man pulled up his zipper and turned back slowly. His eyes were as dazzling as obsidian, and his nose was very straight. Pei Chichi immediately thought of sex. She took a step back and pressed her back against the wall. That man, step by step, walked towards her. She moved her body, trying to escape. But he just stood in front of her, staring at her little face. His eyes flashed with a touch of pain. He was in pain. Pei Chichi reached out and touched his face gently. She only dared to touch him once. She felt that she was too crazy to be smitten with a man in the washroom. Although she and Qin Anlan were only in name, she was a married woman. How could she, however, she really wanted to hug the man in front of her, because he looked so painful. If she hugged him, would he feel better? Pei Chichi would never admit that she coveted her idol's beauty. But she wouldn't admit it either. She only dared to think about it. Tang Yu stared at her little face. There was infatuation and curiosity in her eyes. But that was definitely not the reaction that his Chichi should have. He said slowly, "Have you seen enough?" Her eyes widened a little. If not, will you go to the bathroom again? Her eyes moved down to a certain part of him, very straightforwardly. Very good. Tang Yu admitted that he was testing her. His heart was already in turmoil, but his face was still as calm as ever. It was true that this was his Chichi, but his Chichi would never look at him like this. With just one look, he was sure that she had forgotten. This speculation came from Shen Lian's complete amnesia and Shen Zhongshan's dementia. That short period of clarity was actually a blessing. He closed his eyes. His Chichi had forgotten about him. In her world, there was only Qin Anlan. No. He looked at her, then held her arm and forcefully led her out. Where is your family? I'll take you there. Before Pei Chichi could say anything, his hand had already slid down and clasped her little hand. She was dazed for a moment. That feeling, how to describe it, was great. There was a warmth that spread from the palm of her hand to her heart, as if it had filled up a certain empty space. She knew that this was not the right time, because Anlan would see it later. She stuck out her tongue. What she was doing now, was she cheating on him? Would Anlan explode in anger? At this moment, a slender figure stood on the other side of the hall. It was Qin Anlan. He saw that Tang Yu was holding Pei Chichi's hand. Her expression was very rich, but it was definitely not disgust. Even if she had forgotten Tang Yu, her body still remembered that man. Qin Anlan looked at Tang Yu seriously. Please, don't hurt her. Don't mention the past, okay? He was begging Tang Yu. As Pei Chichi's man, Tang Yu only felt sad. But he knew that he had compromised. In other words, Qin Anlan bringing Pei Chichi back was, in a sense, a kind of compromise. Chapter 1068. If Qin Anlan hadn't loved her so deeply, he would have had countless opportunities to possess her in the past 2 years. But he hadn't. He hadn't forced himself on her at all. Later on, he hadn't even kissed her. He could feel her relief when he moved out of the master bedroom. She had even opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate that night. That naughty child. He even knew that she had gone to Dr. York's place. Instead of treating her properly, she had slept there. These were all signs of his reluctance to part with her and his indulgence. But he had done so much for her. She might not understand. Qin Anlan smiled bitterly. He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. He went straight to the point. I can't give up on Chichi. Tang Yu's expression was a little cold. She's my wife. She's mine too. Qin Anlan smiled. We got the certificate in New York. It was just in name only. They were getting along more like brother and sister now. He was waiting for the day when she would look back and see his deep love. Tang Yu closed his eyes. Qin Anlan, you're really good. Qin Anlan smiled. I think it's the best thing I've ever done. Tang Yu looked at him and stepped back. Then you'll regret bringing her back. He suddenly turned around and his slender figure disappeared from the end of the hall. The light stretched his shadow. Kaim appeared out of nowhere and said softly, President Qin, Yi Liangqiu didn't agree to the company's conditions, but she didn't reject them either. She said. Qin Anlan frowned. What did she say? Kaim's voice was very soft. She said she wants President Qin to talk to her personally. Qin Anlan glared at Kaim, meaning that he was useless and that Kaim didn't dare to say anything. Actually, he felt wronged. Yi Liangqiu was the heavenly Queen Yi. In King Entertainment, who could deal with her? It wasn't that she was a big shot, but that she was special. It was so special that, it seemed that without President Qin's intervention, he wouldn't be able to handle her. Unlike other female celebrities, Yi Liangqiu, who was at the peak of her career, had no scandals at all. Her life was a mystery. Especially every summer, she wouldn't take on any jobs. Winter was the same. Her manager said that Empress Yi didn't like these 2 seasons. Hearing Kaim's words, Qin Anlan's eyebrows twitched fiercely. If he could, he didn't want to be led by the nose by Yi Liangqiu, but King Entertainment really needed her right now. Looking at President Qin's constipated expression, Kaim had a premonition that Empress Yi, who had been frozen for 2 years, was going to soar into the sky again. Yi Liangqiu would once again become the most popular heavenly empress, and no one would be able to compete with her. Keim's eyes were a little hot. He was so touched. Actually, he was also a loyal fan of Yi Liangqiu. He had hidden 18 sets of Yi Liangqiu's photos. Phut, Qin Anlan arranged for the chauffeur to send Pei Chichi back to his penthouse apartment in B City, while he took a car back to King Entertainment. Pei Chichi sat in the car, not noticing that Tang Yu was sitting in the parallel car. Separated by a car window, Tang Yu watched her open her little bag and take pictures with her little camera. Her expression was happy and carefree. Countless neon lights shone on her body, forming light and shadow, but also seeming illusory. Tang Yu's eyes were tightly locked, afraid that she would suddenly disappear. His heart was surging with hot blood. He also wanted to hug her, wanted to kiss her, wanted to tell her that he missed her. She was so excited that she did not care if she was on the way or how she was going to get to the city. Tang Yu's car stopped about 10 steps away from her. He lit a cigarette and looked at her quietly. His gaze was even gentler than the night. Pei Chichi, I love you too. No matter what you look like. Pei Chichi finally noticed the uninvited guest. She tilted her head and looked at Tang Yu, recognizing him. I'll send you, he said lightly. Where are you staying? Pei Chichi lifted her bag. I don't know. I might have to stay in a hotel. Running away from home? There was a deep smile in his eyes. She could not understand it. Pei Chichi bit her lip. That's not it. That. Tang Yu wanted to ask something at first, but he felt that he could not bring himself to ask. Forget it. She was already cold. What was there for him to ask and be calculative about? Chapter 1071. Pei Chichi walked over. I'll just sit in the back. But there were 2 big bears and some children's toys in the back seat. There was no place to sit at all. She was a little embarrassed. Sit in front, Tang Yu said lightly. Pei Chichi nodded and sat in the empty seat he opened. The moment she sat down, she smelled like a mix of leather seats and a man's cologne. It wasn't unpleasant. On the contrary, it was refreshing. Tang Yu closed the door and sat in the car. As he fastened his seatbelt, he gestured for her to do the same. He said slowly, why didn't you guard against me? Pei Chichi was a little tired. Her little face was askew as she looked at the night sky outside. Because I took a picture of your car plate and gave it to Anlan. Now that he knew that she had run away from home, he must be very angry. Tang Yu's movements slowed down. After a while, a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Between the 2 of them, perhaps it was only Qin Anlan who was hot-headed. Also, I know that your name is Tang Yu. Pei Chichi turned her little face and yawned. Someone who can dance with me for an hour shouldn't be a bad person. What she didn't say was that if bad people were all so good-looking, she would rather the whole world be full of bad people. She tilted her little face and fell asleep just like that. The car window was open and the night breeze was blowing. Tang Yu's heart was unbelievably gentle. He thought that he would be angry and at a loss in such a situation, but he accepted it easily. His Chichi was still the same Chichi from before. The car slowed down and slowly arrived at the GM hotel. He opened the car door, carried her out of the car and kicked the door shut. The GM manager on duty was shocked to see him. But when he saw the person in his arms, he was even more shocked. Wasn't this? Tang Yu gave him a shushing expression and walked straight into the private elevator to the presidential suite on the top floor. He walked slowly into the master bedroom, placed the little thing in his arms on the soft bed and covered her with the blanket. She slept soundly, as if she was exhausted. Tang Yu sat beside her and looked at her sleeping face. He took off her hairband and spread her long black hair on the pillow. It was the way he longed to miss. He let out a deep breath, lowered his head, and kissed her forehead. He was reluctant to leave, but he didn't want to be rude to her. After staring at her for a long time, he finally got up and took her bag outside. The noble Mr. Tang rummaged through her bag without feeling guilty at all. He found Dr. York's business card and wrote it down on his phone. Her cell phone was also there, but the number was no longer the same as before. It was registered in America, and it was all in English. He slid it open to unlock it with his fingerprint. Tang Yu took the phone and walked into the bedroom. He gently grabbed her little hand and unlocked the phone. When Pei Chichi woke up, it was already 8 o'clock in the morning. She sat up and found something furry beside her. She raised her hand and saw a huge bear. She remembered that it was in the man's car last night. There were 2 of them. Why did he bring this one here? There was also a white rose beside the bed. There was a row of beautiful English words written on it. A beautiful night, Tang Yu. Chapter 1073. Pei Chichi lowered her head to look at herself. Her clothes were still fine, and not a single button was missing. This was not beautiful at all. She picked up the rose and smelled it. It was a refreshing smell. She jumped up to brush her teeth when her phone rang. She walked over to pick it up. It was Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan's voice was a little restrained. Chichi, why did you ditch the driver last night? The license plate she had given him looked very familiar. Later on, he got Kaim to check and it turned out to be Tang Yu's. He was furious, but he had boarded the private plane at the last minute because that damned Yi Liangqiu had dropped a huge bomb in a city, and he had no choice but to leave B City temporarily. At this moment, Qin Anlan was experiencing the biggest turning point in his life, the most difficult choice. It was Tang Yu who had put him in a difficult position. Pei Chichi could hear the anger in his voice and stuck out her tongue. Anlan, you're not here again. I don't want to be alone at home. It sounded nice, but he knew that she had long wanted to live alone. He had never agreed to it. If they didn't live in the same house, then they would really exist in name only. She moved out the first month, and in the second month, she dared to ask for a divorce. Sometimes, he really couldn't understand why they were like this. Was it his wishful thinking? I can't be with you all the time. His tone was a little heavy, and he regretted it after saying it. He admitted that he had been knocked out by the bomb that Yi Liangqiu dropped. She was really good, really daring to hide it from him for so many years. He wasn't stupid. Yi Liangqiu must have told him now because she knew that he had brought Pei Chichi back to the country. She was really good. He had always thought that he had underestimated her. She was good at acting, but in real life, she was even better. After he said the harsh words, there was silence on the other side of the phone. Qin Anlan's voice was soft. Chichi, I'm sorry. He then said, I'm on a business trip and I'm not in B City. If you want to stay outside, I'll get Kaim to find you a good hotel. Pei Chichi lay on the bed and looked at the chandelier above. No need. I have already moved in. He reached out and took the name tag from the side. Anlan, it's GM Hotel. On the other side, Qin Anlan's blood almost froze. Sure enough, she was with Tang Yu last night. You, alone? He asked tentatively. Of course not, she said briskly. And a bear. Qin Anlan let out a long sigh. Be a little more obedient these days, understand? The truth was, she was very disobedient, and he was slowly losing control of her. Okay, Anlan, I'm going to take a shower. She quickly ran into the bathroom without hanging up. Qin Anlan could hear her singing. Her singing was very unpleasant, but she sang very happily. He slowly put down his phone, his mind in a mess. Kaim said softly, President, get in the car. Until today, Kaim only knew how amazing Yi Liangqiu was. President Qin was a man who never let women control him, but he was actually forced to come to a city to meet Yi Liangqiu. How big of a face was this? How awesome was this? Before getting in the car, Qin Anlan suddenly said, Kaim, go back to B City and report to me about Chichi's whereabouts. Kaim was in a difficult position, because Pei Chichi was Tang Yu's wife. But the marriage between Pei Chichi and Tang Yu was not valid. They had signed the marriage certificate, but Pei Chichi had disappeared without a notarization. Chapter 1074. Qin Anlan could tell what Kaim was thinking and snorted. Hurry up and go. Kaim had no choice but to return to the private plane and return to B City. Actually, Qin Anlan had another reason. He didn't want a third person to know about him and Yi Liangqiu, not even Kaim. He couldn't let Chichi know. However, when Kaim returned to B City, she couldn't see Pei Chichi. She had moved away from GM Boyi headquarters. Tang Yu sat behind his desk. Xiao Ran placed a large stack of documents in front of him and said softly, "I've contacted Dr. Shorkeshan and confirmed that Chichi has indeed lost her memory," and Tang Yu looked at the documents while listening to Xiao Ran. Also, Dr. Shorkeshan said that Chichi's brain was invaded by drugs at that time, which might confuse her memory. In the end, she would end up like Shen Zhongshan and Shen Lian, so Qin Anlan found a hypnotist. In other words, everything is normal. It's just that she has forgotten a lot of things. Tang Yu closed his eyes. I understand. Everything could be explained if that was the case. However, what he couldn't understand was that since Qin Anlan could hypnotize Chichi to forget everything, why didn't he hypnotize her and make Chichi fall in love with him? In fact, Qin Anlan had tried to do that, but he had failed. The experienced hypnotist told Qin Anlan that he couldn't do anything. If he tried to hypnotize her forcefully, it might damage her brain, so Qin Anlan didn't force it anymore. After saying that, Xiao Ran left. At the door, she met Meng Qingcheng. After looking at him indifferently, she walked towards her office. That night, just as she said, "Forget it," Meng Qingcheng looked at her back for a long time and didn't say anything. Xiao Ran and Tang Xin had completely different personalities. Admittedly, Xiao Ran was more suitable to be a wife. However, what Meng Qingcheng wanted was not only marriage, but also love. At the very least, what he felt for Xiao Ran now was not love. In the office, Tang Yu carefully looked at Chichi's hospitalization in the United States, which had been well hidden by Qin Anlan. After reading it once, he let out a long sigh and smiled bitterly. He had been quite optimistic last night, but now he felt that the road ahead was difficult. Qin Anlan treated Chichi very well, but too well, which undoubtedly made Chichi feel guilty. Coupled with the damn marriage certificate between her and Qin Anlan, he knew how difficult it was for a woman to break through that barrier. As long as Qin Anlan didn't let go, he would get close to Chichi, and even if something happened between them, it would be a little, that. But Tang Yu didn't care so much. He missed her and wanted to take her back at all costs. He would make Qin Anlan give up the marriage certificate. As long as Yi Liangqiu was around, he couldn't stay by Chichi's side peacefully. He took out his phone and opened it. There was Chichi's diary in it, and he sent it to his phone. He also knew that she moved to the Pearl Hotel with the bear that was as tall as a person. She also took his white rose with her. Tang Yu smiled slightly and looked up at the morning sun. Good morning, Chichi. The phone rang again. He looked at it and frowned. It was Pei Huan. In the past 2 years, Pei Huan had appeared in front of him many times. Firstly, it was to take care of Chichi. Because after Chichi's accident, he took Chichi back to the rose garden to take care of her. Pei Huan often came over with his Kanxing. Before his parents thought of a new name, little Kanxing still used the particularly nice name Kanxing, looking for Kanxing's psychological shadow. Pei Huan also had another intention, which was to often come to keep an eye on Tang Yu. He couldn't give up looking for Chichi, and he was not allowed to marry another woman. What big bomb did Yi Liangqiu drop? Chapter 1075. Tang Yu was speechless, but it also proved that Pei Huan was sincere to Chichi. Picking up Pei Huan's call, Tang Yu heard crackling sounds coming from the other end of the line. He put the phone away a little further. Pei Huan hugged Kanxing and almost choked with sobs. Tang Yu, is Chichi back? Tang Yu didn't understand how Pei Huan got the news, because Xiao Ran and Meng Qingcheng were very cautious people. Pei Huan's voice was a little excited. Why is she with Qin Anlan? Tang Yu was silent for a long time, and Pei Huan's heart sank. After a long time, Tang Yu said softly. Chichi lost her memory and forgot who we are. Pei Huan scolded. Do you have to be so melodramatic? Tang Yu didn't say anything. He heard Laro Khan scolding Pei Huan, which meant that she had taught her son bad things. Tang Yu was a little envious. At least, Laro Khan could still scold Pei Huan, while his pillow had been empty for 2 years. He said a few words to Pei Huan. Pei Huan was reluctant at first, but then she reluctantly agreed. After Tang Yu hung up the phone, Xiao Ran came in with a mobile phone in his hand. It's Xiaoshan. Tang Yu took it and motioned for Xiao Ran to go out first. Then he cleared his throat. Cher, what's wrong? Tang Cher, also known as Xiaoshan, didn't like others calling her Xiaoshan. She thought that was the name of a little kid. Cher sounded so nice. Cher was lying on the bed, and her voice was very soft. Dad, when will you come back? The most important thing was to bring her mother back. Tang Yu's heart softened. He was the one who gave birth to the child. How could he not know what Shuere was thinking? He comforted her gently. Daddy will be back tonight. Be good, Shuere. Xiaoshan hung up the phone reluctantly. Tang Yu thought in his heart, should he let Xiaoshan go to kindergarten? A 5-year-old child should have gone to bed a long time ago, but he had been busy looking for Chichi for the past 2 days, so he hadn't had the time. It was June now, so he could just wait until autumn. Tang Yu thought for a long time, but he couldn't think of any kindergarten that was worthy of his princess. 5 minutes later, he called Xiao Ran on the internal line. President. Xiao Ran stood in front of Tang Yu in a professional manner. Tang Yu's gaze was on the screen of his laptop. His tone was a little indifferent. Xiao Ran, help me find out more about early childhood education. Pick the best chain organization and have Ching Cheng purchase it within a month. Xiao Ran blinked his eyes and understood. He sighed in his heart. Reincarnation was a skill. She nodded. All right, I'll report the progress to the headquarters. She walked out and pursed her lips. She thought of Meng Qingcheng, and there was some pain on her face. Tang Yu didn't sleep that night. He rested at noon and didn't return to Rose Garden until 6 in the evening. As soon as the car door opened, a little girl jumped into his arms. Dad. Her voice was excited, and her eyes were fixed on the car. Of course, when she saw that there was no one in the car, Xiaoshan, who was Cher, smiled slightly. Where's Mom? Tang Yu carried the little girl into the main house. The little maid bowed at the door. Hello, sir. Tang Yu just nodded. Xiaoshan bit Tang Yu's ear. This Lisa likes Dad. Tang Yu hit her little butt. Nonsense. Chapter 1076. Tang Yu's face was a little solemn as he held back his smile. Really? Xiaoshan tried her best to say yes. Yes. She was worried about Papa's chastity. Papa hadn't fought with a demon for 2 years. Would he be seduced by a female demon? But Mama was back, so these female demons couldn't get close to Papa. Xiaoshan held Tang Yu's arm and looked at Li Shuo fiercely. Tang Yu carried her upstairs and called the butler to put away all the things related to Pei Chichi in the villa. Xiaoshan was somewhat puzzled, and looked at him. Daddy, why? Tang Yu hugged her. Xiaoshan, do you want Mama back? Xiaoshan's eyes sparkled. Of course. But Mama forgot about us. Xiaoshan, do you want to keep Mama here? Tang Yu touched the little girl's head. Can we do that? Xiaoshan looked at her papa and felt dizzy. Tang Yu smiled. You can't call me Mama when you see her. You can only call her sister, understand? Xiaoshan nodded and then raised her head. Can I see Mama? Tang Yu kissed her. Of course, but remember what I said, okay? Xiaoshan clapped her hands excitedly. Tang Yu smiled and rubbed his chin. It seemed that Xiaoshan was a good weapon. During dinner, Xiaoshan said in a low voice, Papa, look. Li Shuo is peeking at you again. Tang Yu glanced at her and Xiaoshan shut up. At night, Tang Yu leaned against the headboard in his bathrobe. He held a cigarette in one hand and read Chichi's diary on his phone with the other. He didn't know how many times he had read those 10,000 words over and over again. He felt as if she was right beside him. Also, He set up a synchronized update on her phone to his number. He did it secretly so that he would know the moment she wrote something new. Although it was a little despicable, he wanted to know. He wanted to know her heart and her thoughts. There was a knock on the door. He thought it was Xiaoxin, who didn't want to sleep, and smiled. "Come in." But it wasn't Xiaoxin who came in. It was Li Shuo, the little demon. Tang Yu took a glance. He hadn't noticed it before, but now he noticed that Li Shuo's uniform was slightly different from the other maids. The waist was especially tight, and the Xiongnu's mouth was also especially tight, as though it was about to burst out. Under the maid's skirt was a pair of slender and fair legs. It was truly a waste for her to be a maid. Tang Yu frowned. He couldn't remember when the Rose Garden's servant uniform had become so sexy, or when the skirt had become so short. Lisa was quite good-looking. Her long black hair was tied up and she was wearing a seductive uniform. It was obvious what she was thinking by appearing in the male owner's room so late at night. Also, she was wearing perfume. He could smell it. It was Chanel No. 5. Chichi used to wear it occasionally. Li Shuo held a glass of water in her hand and said softly, "Sir, have a glass of water." Tang Yu looked at the water in her hand and took it from her. He placed it by the bedside but didn't drink it. He said calmly, "There's nothing here. Go out." Li Shuo bit her lip. Her delicate face was moving. She said softly, "Sir, I can't bear to see you suffer for the past 2 years. I'm willing to give myself to you." Li Shuo bit her lip. Her delicate face was lovely. She said softly, "Sir, I can't bear to see you suffer for the past 2 years. I'm willing to give myself to you." Tang Yu's gaze fell on her face. He didn't say anything. Chapter 1077. The kind with black lace. To be honest, Tang Yu wasn't too tempted. He only felt that Li Shuo was cosplaying. He was also a little worried that there might be something wrong with her brain. He smiled and picked up the magazine at the side, flipping through it casually. "Get out. Get 3 months' salary from the butler." Li Shuo was stunned. She didn't expect that someone as beautiful as herself would be rejected by Sir. She couldn't accept it. Li Shuo was just a simple-minded maid who ran away in sexy pajamas. Tang Yu put down the magazine and looked at the maid costume on the ground. Later, the butler was ordered to find a new one and tailored it for Sir according to Li Shuo's method. The butler thought that Sir must be dissatisfied with Yu Qiu and became a pervert. As for Li Shuo's set, it was burned by Tang Yu. The maids in the villa were all replaced by women over 40 years old. Otherwise, Chichi would be angry. Pei Chichi stayed at the Pearl Hotel for a couple of days and felt a little bored. During the day, she went out to collect photos. She seemed to have a natural sense for cameras and liked them. At night, she experienced the nightlife in B City and the atmosphere of the night. She was a little fascinated by the hot and humid summer, which was different from the cold and dry winter. She liked to wear all kinds of dresses and travel through B City. It was as if she had found her roots. She liked B City and didn't like that place with yellow hair and green eyes. This was also why her Anlan was very different. In the morning, she came back from collecting photos and wanted to take a shower before going to the first floor of the hotel to eat. But when she rushed into the elevator, she was a little embarrassed because it was full of people. To be precise, it was all men. She wanted to retreat, but a big hand grabbed her arm in an instant. She fell in and fell straight into an embrace. Pei Chichi's little face bumped into the other person's chest, and one of her legs squeezed into a place that he couldn't describe. And she felt that he was quickly doing that. Wasn't it too fast? What kind of speed was this? Or had all the men in B City evolved into beasts? Pei Chichi's face was a little hot, especially when she smelled the man's unique scent. She struggled for a moment, but a few more people rushed in from behind and knocked her into the man's arms. She instinctively held onto something, but it was as if she was hugging him. Their bodies were also in close contact, indescribable. She thought of 15 centimeters and felt that this man was even bigger. When he looked up, he was stunned. Tang Yu. The man she met at the airport. Why was he here? President, do we need to change elevators? a subordinate suggested. Tang Yu glanced over and said in a deep voice, "No need." Pei Chichi whispered against his chest, "Yes." Although it was soft, everyone heard it. They all smiled meaningfully. Need Tang Yu did the same. He lowered his head and looked at the little fellow in his arms. It was so soft and so unwilling to lie on his body. He was thinking that the employees who squeezed her to his side should get a raise and chicken drumsticks. Pei Chichi had no choice but to curl up in his arms. But he kept, like that. Didn't he feel uncomfortable? And if they went out, they would be seen. She moved uncomfortably, and her back was immediately pressed down by someone. His voice whispered into her ear, "Don't move." She widened her eyes and bit her lip. Chapter 1078. After a long time, Pei Chichi felt that they should have reached the 100th floor. Why wasn't it there yet? She looked up and was speechless. The elevator was not moving. It stopped on the first floor. Press the 19th floor. She bit her lip. She pressed the button at the door of the elevator and looked at Tang Yu carefully. Tang Yu did not say anything. The man laughed. "We are on this floor too." Everyone laughed. "Yes, what a coincidence. We are having a meeting on this floor." Haha, Boyi's meeting was going to be held in the hotel. Haha, with a ding, the elevator door opened. Everyone consciously retreated and looked at the chandelier above silently. Give the president a chance. Tang Yu and Pei Chichi were still hugging each other in the same position. It was not that she did not want to separate, but her hair was tangled in the button of his suit. Every time she moved, her scalp would hurt. Tang Yu smiled faintly. He did not tell her that he was the one who wrapped her hair up. At this moment, she was lying pitifully in his arms. He knew best how afraid she was of pain. He reached out and pressed her scalp gently. His voice was low and deep, with an undetectable gentleness. "Don't move. I'll do it." The higher-ups outside retreated again. They could not listen anymore. It was the president who wrapped Pei Chichi's hair up. However, Boss Pei seemed to have lost his memory. There were so many people, but he did not recognize any of them. They looked at the president with a strange gaze. They all sighed. The world was unpredictable. However, it was good that he was back. Tang Yu stretched out his hand and pressed it against her slender hair. He gently undid her hair. In reality, it was easy, but his voice was hoarse. "Lean your face closer to me." Although Pei Chichi felt a little strange, she still moved her face closer to him. This kind of attitude was really a little strange and funny. Tang Yu chuckled softly and reached out to rub her hair. "All right, silly." She immediately jumped out because he was still beastly. She stood outside while Tang Yu stood in the elevator. She bit her lip and stared at him with an indescribable charm. The 25-year-old Pei Chichi had lived like a 20-year-old. Tang Yu smiled faintly and walked out. She stepped back, hands behind her back, and looked at him. Tang Yu's lips curled into a faint smile. When he passed her, he paused for a moment and muttered, "Coward." At this time, his coat was across his arm, which also blocked his discomfort. Pei Chichi made a face at him. "Pervert." Suddenly, Tang Yu turned around, his gaze fixed on her little face. That clear and deep gaze made Pei Chichi's little face turn red. "Shameless, perverted." Tang Yu smiled faintly and stared at her for a while before walking into a high-class suite with the company's executives. Pei Chichi went back to her own room and lay on the bed for a long time without getting up. When she closed her eyes, she saw that pair of clear eyes. Her body suddenly heated up. She opened her eyes suddenly. "Pei Chichi, you must be crazy." She immediately got up and ran to the bathroom, turning on the cold water to rinse. A few days ago, a master had said that her works were always dry and lacked something. Later on, the master had said that her works lacked flesh and desire. How could there be such a thing in her works? Pei Chichi did not understand. She washed her body with cold water to wash away the unusual heat in her body. Chapter 1079. Pei Chichi closed her eyes and a vague image appeared in her mind. A man and a woman hugging and kissing under the spray in the bathroom, as well as the most primitive thing between a man and a woman. Pei Chichi was shocked and hugged herself against the wall of the bathroom. Because the feeling just now was too real, as if she had experienced it herself. The man whispered in the woman's ear, "Chichi, be good and call me brother." Chichi. Chichi. Was it her? Pei Chichi felt that she must have gone crazy. Yes, it was Yu Qiu who was dissatisfied. She wrapped herself in a bath towel and ran back to the bedroom, searching for Baidu on her phone. She tried to imagine what it was like to have sex. In the end, the answers on Baidu were all the same. Yu Qiu was dissatisfied. Pei Chichi covered her face and fell on the bed. God, what should she do? She had an inappropriate desire for a man who had a child and should have a wife too. No, this couldn't happen. She rolled on the bed a few times and ordered herself not to think about it. Well, think more about Anlan. Just think about Anlan. But she had no interest in Anlan's body. She had only known this man for a few days and met him twice, but every time she wanted to tear off his clothes and do those shameful things. After rolling on the bed a few times, she reached for her phone. She opened her small document and wrote a few words. What should I do? I want to have sex with him. He must be more than 15 centimeters. But I have never felt this way for Anlan. She thought for a while and added, if he doesn't have a wife, I will have sex with him. She added 3 exclamation marks. After she finished writing, she lay on the bed and pretended to be dead. She rolled around and finally curled up on her stomach with her little butt sticking up high. I'm done for. No, she couldn't go on like this. It was immoral to have desire for a married man with a child. Pei Chichi repeated it 3 times. Then she cried out. In the suite, Tang Yu's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at it and gestured for the people below to continue while he looked at the content on the phone. It was Pei Chichi who had updated her diary. As for the content, it was especially exciting. He must be more than 15 cm. Although she couldn't remember, she had always been curious about a certain object. Also, he had a wife and children. He didn't deny that sometimes, such taboos made people even crazier. Tang Yu quietly put away his phone and continued with the meeting. Pei Chichi didn't go out for dinner until it was almost 12 o'clock. Just as he arrived at the courtyard, his eyes flashed, and he saw a particularly beautiful girl standing there, looking as though she was lost. Pei Chichi had already walked over. Seeing that the little girl was wiping her tears, she reversed her legs and walked back to the little girl's side. Little girl, why are you crying? Xiaoshan wiped her tears, eye drops were squeezed onto her face, and sobbed, Missy, I'm looking for Daddy. The little girl peeked through the gaps between her fingers. Pei Chichi looked around but didn't see any parents around. Then big sister will bring you to him, okay? She squatted down so that she was at the same level as the little girl. The more she looked at her, the more she felt that the little girl was especially beautiful and delicate. She kissed her little face. It was also soft and tender. Really? The little girl looked adorable with tears in her eyes. Pei Chichi nodded. Of course. Xiaoshan happily hugged her arm. Chapter 1080. Xiaoshan brought Pei Chichi to the door of a suite. Dad is inside. Pei Chichi blinked, feeling that the world was a bit fantastical. The cute baby clearly knew where her father was, but she was still crying there. Xiaoshan said with a smile, Sister, I'm looking for a new wife for Dad. One of the tests is to have a loving heart. You passed. Pei Chichi was shocked. She couldn't believe that she had been taught a lesson by a little girl. But even though the little girl said so, she still knocked on the door. She had to send the little girl to the adults. The door opened about 10 seconds later, and it was a middle-aged man who opened the door. There were more than 10 men sitting in the room. The one at the head was the 15 centimeters girl. Pei Chichi was a little embarrassed. She immediately pulled Xiaoshan out and pressed her in front of her. Whose child is this? The executives of Boyi shook their heads, packed up and prepared to go home. That was the end of today's meeting. No one answered. Pei Chichi was a little embarrassed. She reached out and held Xiaoshan. Let's find another place. She stuck out her tongue. It seemed that the child's words could not be trusted. Just as she was about to leave, Xiaoshan softened and called out Dad. Then she broke free from Pei Chichi and ran to Tang Yu, hugging him tightly. Pei Chichi covered her face. It was his child. And she actually had that kind of shameful desire for the cute baby's father, so Pei Chichi was particularly uncomfortable. She coughed lightly. Mr. Tang, your child just got lost. Xiaoshan is very smart. Tang Yu sat at the head with the dignity of a superior. He was like a different person from the man who danced with her at the exit of the highway that night. His voice was calm, completely like a suspicious father who cared about his beloved daughter. Moreover, Mingzhu Hotel is a hotel under Boyi, she can't get lost. Pei Chichi listened to his words and almost jumped up. Xiaoshan couldn't get lost, so she deliberately abducted his daughter? Pei Chichi's little face tensed up. Since that's the case, I won't bother you anymore. She turned around and walked away. She was so anxious that her tears were real this time. Papa. Tang Yu got up and held onto Pei Chichi's arm before she could walk out. His voice was very low. I apologize. Pei Chichi struggled a little. Let go. He didn't let go and just lowered his head to look at her. In his eyes, there was a touch of gentleness that she did not understand. Aren't you afraid that I'll cling to you? Perhaps I'm a scheming woman who approached your daughter with an ulterior motive, intending to. Before she could finish, he interrupted her. He looked at her with a bright gaze. Intending to sleep with me? His straightforwardness made Pei Chichi widen her eyes. She just stared at him, unable to say a word. Her body leaned against the door, and his body was very close to hers. His heart was standing behind him, cheering him on. Papa kissed her. Papa kissed her. Tang Yu looked down at her. His thin lips were close to her ear, and he said in a low voice, Pei Chichi, do you dare to say that you haven't imagined me in that way? Haven't you guessed my size? Size? 15 cm. Pei Chichi was stunned again. She looked at him for a long time and swallowed hard. But she still dared to ask, then, do you have 15 centimeters? Chapter 1081. Xiaoshan nodded and immediately turned around. Wow, Daddy is going to do something bad. Is he going to fight with the fairies? So excited. Pei Chichi looked at their tacit cooperation and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why did she think that the little girl was innocent and cute? She was a little devil. Or did she often cheat girls with her father? There was some suspicion in her eyes, but her little hand was forcefully caught by a gentle big palm. Tang Yu grabbed her hand and said in a low voice, you need to feel for yourself whether it is true or not. Pei Chichi lowered her head and widened her eyes in disbelief. She struggled but couldn't break free. Then it was indescribable. However, he only held her down for 2 seconds before letting go. His large palm landed on her waist. He held her and said in a low voice, don't stare at me there anymore. Pei Chichi's mind was in a mess. What did he mean by staring at him there? Tang Yu took a step back and said, Miss Pei, you can go now. Pei Chichi had been humiliated in an eerie manner. She glared at him and gritted her teeth. You bastard. Thank you for bringing Xiaoshan back. In the face of her gnashing teeth, he became graceful again. Pei Chichi turned around and left. She felt that she couldn't stay in this hotel anymore. She wanted to move out immediately, but reality slapped her in the face. She ordered the most expensive French food on the first floor, but when she paid, she found that her card couldn't be swiped. After swiping it several times, the manager came over and presented her card. He said apologetically, I'm sorry, miss. You have other cards, or you can pay in cash. Pei Chichi was puzzled. What's wrong? The manager said, your card has been frozen. Pei Chichi felt that there was a flash of lightning above her head. She dialed Qin Anlan's number. When the call went through, Qin Anlan sounded exhausted. Chichi, I was the one who stopped your card. Contact Kaim, he will arrange everything for you. Pei Chichi was stunned. After a while, she said softly, Anlan, what are you afraid of? Qin Anlan's heart ached. After a while, he said, Chichi, don't mess around. I'll be back in a month. Go home and live there. He was exhausted, and she was disobedient, so he could only stop her card. However, he had underestimated her rebellious mentality. In the past 2 years, he had taken good care of her and knew that she couldn't endure hardship. So, when he stopped her card, she would obediently return to his apartment. But he was wrong. The more he restrained her, the more she wanted freedom. In Pei Chichi's heart, they were not husband and wife, but family. His domineering and possessive feelings made her feel suffocated. She longed for freedom. After Qin Anlan said that, Pei Chichi said faintly, "Anlan, I'm not going back." After saying that, she hung up and pulled out her SM card. She searched her bag for all the cash and barely paid for the meal. Then, she fell into a very bleak situation. How could she pay 30,000 a day for a suite? Fortunately, she had paid 3 days in advance, so she didn't have to mortgage herself here. After getting back 3,300 yuan from the front desk, Pei Chichi was completely homeless on the streets. Carrying a small suitcase and wearing a small straw hat, she walked on the streets of B City, kicking pebbles. Chapter 1082. 3,300 yuan. Even if she stayed in a hotel that cost 200 yuan a day, she could only survive for 10 days. Ever since she lost her memory, this was the first time Pei Chichi had to worry about money. Kicking a pebble, how good would it be if she could kick a big gold nugget? Pei Chichi felt that she should look for a job. It would be perfect if she could meet a good boss who would give her a salary in advance. She bought a newspaper and a piece of bread and sat on a bench by the road to read. The bread was hard and she couldn't eat it at all. However, she forced herself to eat it because her stomach was growling. Pei Chichi, next, French food, Italian food, all kinds of fancy food have nothing to do with you. Same for the presidential suite, she wasn't a greedy person. She didn't intend to give Anlan love, and she couldn't give it to him. Therefore, she couldn't ask him to feed her for the rest of her life. She used a pen to draw circles in suitable places and prepared to check it out tomorrow. Most of the jobs she chose were in the photography profession, and the salary wasn't too high. After working for a long time, she put the newspaper aside and focused on eating the horrible bread. Suddenly, the sky changed and the wind started to blow. The rain also dripped down, like beans in a hurry. Pei Chichi hurriedly pulled her luggage and wanted to hide in the pavilion. However, the newspaper she left on the bench was blown away by the wind and floated into the middle of the road. She quickly ran over to pick it up. She picked up the muddy newspaper in the rain and ran back desperately. A black limousine screeched to a stop in front of her. The driver was about to get out of the car, but the girl on the road turned her head and the driver was stunned. Laro Jiao turned his head and said with a trembling voice, "Sir, it's young madam." Tang Yu, who was sitting in the back seat, was very calm. "Just pretend that you don't know her." She forgot everything. Laro Jiao was stunned. Forgot. However, although Sir's tone was calm, there was a hint of pain in it. It wasn't as calm as what he said. It was raining now, and Laro Jiao couldn't sit in the car alone. He quickly took an umbrella and got out of the car to help Tang Yu. It was a rainy evening on the streets of B City. Pei Chichi stood in the rain awkwardly. The rainwater kept pouring into her mouth and soaking her clothes. She stood there with her mouth slightly open, staring blankly at him walking towards her. "Get in the car." He frowned and put his arm around her shoulders as they walked towards the car. Pei Chichi was still holding the newspaper in her hand. She walked a few steps in a daze before she came back to her senses. "My luggage." Tang Yu followed her gaze and instructed old Zhao, "Bring Miss Pei's luggage here." Old Zhao passed the umbrella to Tang Yu and ran over in the rain. He quickly carried the umbrella into the trunk. When he got into the car, he wiped his face. The rain came so fast. He paused for a moment before asking, "Sir, where are we going now?" Originally, Tang Yu had an important contract to sign. Now that he met Pei Chichi, it was impossible for him to go. "Back to the rose garden," he said briefly before throwing a towel to Pei Chichi. "Wipe yourself." In fact, her clothes were all wet. She had to change into dry clothes immediately, or she would have a fever. He knew very well how fragile her body was. Chapter 1083. With that, he hung up the phone and looked at Pei Chichi, because she was looking at him. Pei Chichi asked slowly, "Why did you lie?" Tang Yu's lips curved. Foreign men value their families very much. Such a reason would convince them. Sounds like an unscrupulous businessman. Pei Chichi pouted and shifted her body, probably because her clothes were wet and uncomfortable. Tang Yu looked at her white t-shirt that had become a little transparent because of the rain. His gaze deepened. "Old Zhao, drive faster." Old Zhao smiled bitterly. This was already very fast. In less than half an hour, the car arrived at the rose garden. When they passed through the black carved gate, the entire rose garden was lit up. The roses in the rain emitted a charming luster in the dark. Pei Chichi sat in the car and leaned against the window. "So many roses. This is the rose garden. The place where I live." Tang Yu's tone was very calm. Pei Chichi turned her head and looked at him. The place where he lived. She was just glad that she was saved, but she forgot where he was taking her. This was his home. Pei Chichi bit her lips and said after a long time, "I think your wife would not want you to bring a woman home. She's gone." Tang Yu's voice was very calm, but there was a hint of sadness in it. The little rabbit was immediately fooled. She looked at his sad face with sympathy and said with uncertainty, "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose." Tang Yu turned his head, his eyes were a little bright. "Stay for one night." He looked at the newspaper in her hand and picked it up to take a few glances. "Looking for a job as a photographer?" "Millimeter," Pei Chichi replied. Tang Yu did not say anything else and just carried her luggage into the hall. Pei Chichi stood at the entrance of the hall like a drowned rat, afraid that she would dirty the pure white wool carpet. "Why don't you come in?" He tilted his head to look at her, and then saw her nervous expression. He smiled faintly and asked someone to pass her a pair of slippers. Then, he paused for a moment before saying, "Go upstairs and take a shower. Change your clothes, or you'll catch a cold." Pei Chichi nodded. Now was not the time to be willful. She herself knew that her body was not strong enough. Once she had a fever, it would be over. She followed the maid upstairs. Laro Zhao carried her luggage upstairs and came down after a while. "Sir." Old Zhao scratched his head and said innocently, "Sir, why don't you recognize young madam? Chichi's health isn't good." Obviously, Tang Yu didn't have any intention to say more. Old Zhao also tactfully retreated. He thought that since he was here, he wouldn't be able to escape. Pei Chichi entered a guest room. Her body was too uncomfortable, so she went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. But when she came out and opened her suitcase, she was stunned. Her clothes were all wet. What to do? She would catch a cold if she wore wet clothes. She couldn't always run around the hall in a bathrobe, right? The arrogant Mr. Tang might even think that she was deliberately seducing him. That wouldn't be good. Pei Chichi still hid behind the door and called out to the maid outside like a kitten, "Can you lend me a set of clothes?" The maid only saw a head. She was stunned for a moment and immediately nodded. "Yes, miss." Chapter 1084. She almost screamed, "Why are you here?" No one else but Tang Yu could have those well-defined, slender, and good-looking fingers. "I was just passing by, so I was passing by." As he said that, he retracted his hand and did not look like he was up to no good. Pei Chichi's heart was beating a little fast. She leaned against the door. After all, she was naked just now, and she was separated by the door from a man, and he even handed her clothes. She looked at the clothes in her hands. It was a maid outfit, and it must have been handed to him by the maid just now. She was too naive. Pei Chichi changed into the clothes. They fit her surprisingly well, but this skirt seemed a little too short. She really wondered if this was a maid outfit, or a Sailor Moon warrior outfit. However, it was better than not having dry clothes to wear. She opened the door and was about to go down when she saw Tang Yu standing by the railing. His back was facing her, and his hands were on the railing. When he heard her voice, he turned his body slightly, and then his gaze froze. His voice was a little hoarse. "The clothes fit me well." Pei Chichi was a little embarrassed as she looked at her clothes, and then she looked up. "You're not asking me to pay for the room tonight, are you?" He curled his lips into a smile and walked directly to the hall downstairs. "Let's go downstairs and eat." At this moment, she realized that he had also changed into a set of clothes. He was wearing khaki casual pants with a white shirt on top. The hem of the shirt hung down casually, and it looked very homey, but it still could not hide his noble temperament. The man in front of her was the kind of person who, no matter how casually he dressed, could still be seen to be noble in his bones. Pei Chichi wiped her saliva and followed him downstairs. When she got down, she saw that Xiaoshen was already sitting at the dining table. When she saw Pei Chichi, she sweetly called out "little sister." Pei Chichi waved her hand, like a lucky cat. Now that the adult and the child were her sugar daddy, for a homeless stray cat like her, they were people that she could not afford to offend. Tang Yu looked at her and found it funny. He sat down and said very calmly, "Let's eat." Pei Chichi looked at the dishes. They were all dishes that she liked. She was very satisfied and ate with satisfaction. It was raining outside, but the lights in the hall were pleasant and the temperature was just right. Especially with her full stomach, Pei Chichi felt like she was going to stay here for the rest of her life. After all, it was embarrassing. Her sugar daddy, Qin Anlan, might not be willing to adopt her, unless she was willing to be his real wife and sleep with him. Pei Chichi didn't want to force herself, nor could she force herself. She smiled sweetly at Tang Yu. She had no idea how much he wanted to pounce on her when she was dressed like this and smiling at him like this. "Are you going to sleep in the bedroom I was in?" she asked with a smile, her temper gone. Tang Yu nodded. "Good night." Xiaoshen widened her eyes and looked at her papa. "Xiaoshen wants to sleep with mommy." Tang Yu glanced at her. Xiaoshen immediately changed her words. "Xiaoshen wants to sleep with little sister." The father said without thinking, "Then you go to sleep." Xiaoshen immediately went upstairs. Tang Yu smiled and went upstairs to the study first. He couldn't wait to have her, but she was here now, so she couldn't run away. Looking at her expression, he knew that her card had been suspended. Qin Anlan had been too concerned and had done the stupidest thing without even realizing it. In 1 month, Chichi would be his. Chapter 1085. Pei Chichi did not sleep immediately, but she would rather stay in the bedroom than spend time with the father and daughter. Wearing the sexy maid outfit, she stretched and pressed her legs in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in the bedroom. Then, she frowned and pulled up her skirt. No matter how she pulled it up, she felt that the skirt couldn't cover anything, and it barely covered her small butt. She pulled it down with all her might, but the fabric actually fell with a tearing sound, and was torn into 2 pieces. So weak. She suspected that the male owner here was a pervert, and designed the maid costume to be easily torn by the male owner. Facing the French window, Pei Chichi imitated the man, and pulled hard, then coughed lightly. "It's useless even if you shout yourself hoarse." She laughed as she said that. Just as she said that, the door was opened, and a small head appeared at the door. Pei Chichi was shocked, and turned her head to look. "It's that Xiaoshen," Pei Chichi thought immorally in her heart. "Xiaoshen, little gorilla, can I sleep here?" Xiaoshen at the door was hugging a pillow, and her long hair was let down, which was a little curly. She was wearing a white lace nightgown, and she was deliberately trying to seduce Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi immediately put down the dress fabric in her hand, and it was a little funny when a large piece of fabric was missing. She put her hands behind her back. Children should develop the habit of being independent. "Dad said I don't need to be independent," Xiaoshen said proudly. Well, Pei Chichi felt that the princess in front of her really did not need to be independent, just like if she listened to Anlan, then she would not need to be independent. But what was the fun in that kind of life? At least, she could not love someone, and she could not listen to all his arrangements for the sake of food and clothing. Pei Chichi was quite optimistic at this time, and did not feel that she had fallen into a wolf's den. She looked at the little girl in front of her, and still wanted to persuade her. But, you can't just sleep with strangers, right? Xiaoshan looked at her, and suddenly pulled out an evil smile. Her little body came in, and she sat on her bed, hugging the pillow. That little expression made Pei Chichi's hair stand. Oh right. Little sister, girls can't just casually go home with strangers. Xiaoshan grinned at her, revealing her eerie white teeth. It was extremely hateful. Pei Chichi finally understood what it meant to lift a rock only to smash one's own foot. She stared at her little heart, at that little rascal. Xiaoshan lay down and rolled a few times on the bed with a very happy expression on her face. She stopped and fell asleep. He fell asleep just like that. Her chubby little feet and meaty little hands were still hanging in the air. She fell asleep just like that. However, the little naughty thing was still quite cute when it was sprawled on its back. Pei Chichi could not help but walk over and touch the little guy. He did not move at all. She breathed out a fragrant and sweet breath. Her little body was warm and had the unique milky smell of a child. Looking at her from such a close distance, he could see that her long eyelashes were so thick, her little nose was straight, and her beautiful little mouth was red and moist. Her eyes were closed, and she looked like a little angel. Xiaoshan's seduction was successful. Pei Chichi's heart melted as she looked at her. She wanted to reach out and touch her, but she was afraid that she would wake up the little angel, so she carefully straightened her limbs and covered them with a thin blanket. She looked like she was sleeping well. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.